Hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. Let's start this video from the review of the situation on the front lines, because the Ukrainian army has some turn success in the Kharkiv region. I guess it was around 8 months ago that Russians started their offensive on the northern side of the Kharkiv region. Well, here Ukraine started its own small counterattack not far away from Ruzzian and successfully pushed forward. Yes, it's just a light territorial gain, but it says that Russia is unable to reach its goal with their offensive operation in Kharkiv. And here we also have the confirmation from the deep state military source that definitely Ukraine went on a counterattack, taking this part of the forest. So could it be the start of the bigger Ukrainian counterattack? Well, we're gonna see in the coming days. We see that Russians are mainly concentrated on the eastern side of Ukraine. They are pushing in Pokrovsk, they are pushing also in the Chasiv Yar, in the Taurus direction, and now they start their assault on the south. They cannot control all of the directions, and sometimes Ukraine finds the weak spots in the Russian defense and counterattacks with limited forces, causing the Russian army to send reinforcements to the most weak spots, and that's how Ukraine basically slows down the Russian offensive, even in Pokrovsk. Now let's speak about the Kursk region, where Russian army went totally crazy. This is one of the examples which was filmed on the drone camera of Ukrainian army. In attempts to quickly repel the Ukrainian forces, Russians started to neglect using some of the surveillance equipment, and they're obviously in lack of the communication. So this is the Russian BTR-82A. Only Russians have those kind of the vehicles. And here is the Ukrainian tank, probably T-64, and there is one more. There is some smoke coming from the tank. I was asked by my followers on Telegram of why this tank is smoky. That's because it's the old Soviet tank and it has the diesel engine, so you have this kind of the smoke. Also here you can see one more Russian armored vehicle, and it was heading towards the same direction and was stopped. So I was kind of impressed of how close Russians went to Ukrainian tanks. Yes, on BTR, which doesn't have any kind of the anti-tank devices like the anti-tank rockets, tows, and the armor of the vehicle is very weak against the tank shells. And the outcome, well, it is understandable. I will not show the video here on YouTube because of the restrictions, but you can subscribe for my Telegram channel, and there I post everything what is happening on the front lines. Well, I do avoid some of the gore content, but those kind of the videos from the zoomed out perspective, well, I usually publish on my Telegram. I guess it happened not far away from Novaya Ivanovka, or maybe in this place. Those are two main spots where Russia gained some of the ground. But judging on the video, I would say that our tankists also were not waiting for the Russian BTR to appear. It was an unexpected discovery, so our guys thought that Russians could not be that crazy. I mean, Russian soldiers are definitely sometimes doing crazy stuff. Meanwhile, Russians published the video from their drone, and this is the armored vehicle which they lost. But later in this video we see a burning tank, and Russians say that it belongs to Ukrainian army. So they say that finally they were able to advance in this direction, causing some of the losses for Ukrainian side. So at least one of the tank, they say, was hit. The other tank managed to get away from the place. Guys, honestly, I'm not sure if it is the place, but the crossroad looks very similar. Just one more armored vehicle is absent. I'm speaking about this armored vehicle, but probably Russians managed to get it out from the place. Well, I would say it's very similar, and probably yes, Russians managed to hit one of the tanks. So the traces are similar, and those marks too. Also we have same boots. Yes, I would say it's the same place. For me, it is always important to get as much data as possible. That's why I'm monitoring different channels to show you the real picture. So here you'll not find like propaganda. Yes, this channel is biased for Ukraine. It is understandable, but I tell you always truth. At least I try. And this is how Ukrainian local commanders monitor the situation. So this is exactly the same video as we saw with the Ukrainian tank which kaboomed the Russian BTR. So drones, surveillance drones, share this information live. And of course commanders were happy, but later on Ukraine lost the tank. By the way, it's not the first time that Russians attack the Ukrainian tanks using their BTRs. So here's the Russian BTR and here's the Ukrainian tank. Sorry guys, I have to censor the name of the Telegram channel because it's the Russian one. I don't want to advertise them. Well, this time the Ukrainian tank chose to retreat from the battlefield because there was one more vehicle coming, so Russians assaulted with two of the vehicles, and our guys probably thought that it was one more tank, but it was one more armored vehicle like BTR or something. Russians tried to fire with their 30mm cannon but missed the tank. There was actually the case that the armored vehicle disabled the tank. It was a Bradley vehicle hitting the Russian T-90 tank. I guess that it was not far away from Avdiivka direction. The last winter the Russian T-90 tank was totally disabled, hit the tree, and probably crew left the tank from what I remember. By the way, guys from the 47th Brigade, which captured this tank, were sent to fight in the Kursk Oblast to reinforce that direction. So sometimes infantry fighting vehicles may disable the tanks, but again that was a Bradley vehicle, not the Russian BMP. So what's about the Kursk direction? Well, we have the confirmation that Russians took the territories not far away from Lyubimovka. According to the Noel Reports Analytics, Russians took this area, and Lyubimovka, I would say, is under the Russian control, and they continue to propel forward. Well, also Russians tried to attack the Ukrainian army not far away from Sudzha. They gathered lots of the vehicles, lots of the tanks and forces, again in a big convoy. Well, that convoy was ambushed by Ukraine. Again, we have it from the Noel Reports Analytics. They marked this place, geolocated, with a video of the convoy. And here we go with the video itself. Many of the Russian BMPs, so the fighting infantry vehicles. So those vehicles landed the infantry in that field, and Ukraine finished everyone. Or you may check this video out on Noel Reports Twitter. I share it also in the video description below. So the Russian infantry tried to hide in this triangle forest line, but they were hit definitely. This time Ukraine mostly used the artillery systems and FPV drones. Judging on the video, at least 2 of the Russian BMPs were captured and 2 left the battlefield. The infantry stayed in the battlefield forever. As for the rest updates, Russians now do have the advantage over Ukraine, so they moved in New York towards Nelipivka yesterday and today. Around 1 month ago, Ukraine struck the Russian forces and went into the central part of the New York town, but now Russians pushed the Ukrainian army out to the previous positions. Also, there is the update in Zelensky, it's the Pokrovsk direction. There Russia moved for the last couple of days on the south and on the northern part. It looks like their goal is to attack the town from the flanks, not from the forward part, because here they're stuck. Ukraine blown up the bridge which is blocking the way for the main road. That's why they're attacking from the sides. So the battle for Zelensky is actually already ongoing, and I do expect the urban fights will start the next week maximum. Also, after occupation of Vuhledar and Vodane, Russia moved towards Katerinovka. In this place, their idea is to block Ukrainian army in Kurachev direction from the eastern side of it. We can move to Katerinovka to check it out. So it was yesterday and today just a light movement, but nevertheless Russia moves every day. But here they have the obstacle, the river, and Ukraine is using those settlements as defense line. And Russia also creates one more possible encirclement threat for Ukrainian army in those settlements. As I've told you, after occupation of Tsyrkina village, Russia would go southbound, and that is what they're doing now. So you see this advancement of their attack. Now the gap here is around 5 kilometers, enough for evacuation, but Russia may use artillery and mortars to hit the Ukrainian army. So it's a big threat for Ukrainian group in this place. That's why probably Russia is not attacking Pokrovsk right now, because they're mostly concentrated on this possible encirclement, or I would call it jamming the Ukrainian army in this place. For Ukraine it could be critical, because in this case Ukraine might lose the control over the higher ground settlements. They are on the higher ground compared to this place. But here Russia also needs to cross the war obstacle here as well, and this attack vector of the Russian side for now it's vulnerable. They should expand this bridgehead and only after that try to attack northbound. So now we are speaking about 3 of the critical points for Ukrainian army. It is Zelensky, it is this area, and this one. You may also say that Pokrovsk is critical, but Russians here are not advancing from the flanks right now as they do in those areas. My friends, if you like the job that I do daily on YouTube, you may also consider supporting me on Patreon. The link for my Patreon page I'll put right in the video description below. Thank you so much for maintaining my motivation. But what's about important political-military news for Ukraine? Well, Zelensky went to the parliament of Ukraine and he presented his victory plan to everyone. You probably already checked the main media sources and you understand what this plan is about. I would say nothing really new, everything was published before in the media services. So mainly there are 5 points of this plan, and the first one is the invitation for Ukraine to join NATO. As Zelensky said, Putin should see that Russians' geopolitical calculations are just a failure. The invitation of Ukraine to NATO is the determination of our allies, partners, in the forecast of the future of Ukraine. But guys, let's be honest, no one is inviting Ukraine into NATO, so this first point is quite unrealistic for this day, let's say. God knows what might happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but the representative of the United States in NATO today said that they're not looking for invitation of Ukraine into NATO. But why the NATO membership is so important for Ukraine? Well, first of all, it secures Ukraine in case, let's say, some sort of the negotiations with Russia, because no one will stop Russia if they attack the second time. Only tool the world has is the NATO alliance, the most robust tool. Well, at least invitation could help, because after invitation, some of the countries like United Kingdom or the United States of America may provide their own guarantees for Ukraine. There were also some of the comments about Israel, that it's definitely the ally of the United States in the Middle East. Well, United States have their own interests there, and they apply the separate security guarantees for that country. But after all, the enemies of Israel do not have nukes. Russia has nukes, and they also have ICBMs capable to reach the United States of America. This is why our allies or partners in the United States, I mean the managers of the country, they're afraid to give permission for Ukraine to use Western-made weaponry on the Russian territory, I mean long-range missiles. And that's why they're also afraid to provide security guarantees for Ukraine. So I don't see the close-by perspective for Ukrainian membership in NATO or even the invitation to NATO. Well, everything might happen in the coming days, months or years, but even if United States, for example, today invited Ukraine officially to NATO, there are many other countries in NATO which should ratify that decision, and judging on experience of Sweden, for example, this process takes lots of the time. In Ukrainian case, it will take years and years to convince Hungary, for example, maybe Turkey or Slovakia. So the first point of the plan looks unrealistic in a short or middle-term perspective. The second point which Zelensky presented is the defense of Ukraine, and there he talked about the lift of the restrictions on the long-range weaponry to be used on the Russian territory, but it is understandable that our allies, first of all the United States of America, will not do this step because, as I told you, they are afraid of the Russian nukes, of the escalation. It's their policy and we cannot convince them in other way, so we should wait for the other administration of the White House and see how they behave. Here also Zelensky called partners to shut down the Russian missiles and drones over Ukrainian territory using the forces of NATO in Romania, in Poland, but our allies are also against that. If we speak about Israel and how coalition forces shut down the Iranian drones and missiles, well, Israel again has a separate deal with the United States and they do not have enemies with nukes. At least for now, but Iran is working on that program. Well, at least the third point of this victory plan looks more or less realistic. Ukraine should obtain more weaponry to secure its territories to avoid the further escalation of the Russian side. Well, I think it should apply in case of the peace agreement with Russia. So Ukraine itself should have enough weaponry to defend its territory. As Zelensky said, non-nuclear weaponry. Point number 4, the strategical economical potential of Ukraine. So Zelensky basically said that Ukraine has lots of the resources underground. So if Russia wins, they'll get those resources, but Ukraine may coordinate using those resources with our Western allies. So I think share the part of those resources. I remember then Lindsey Graham went to Ukraine. He also said that Ukraine has enormous resources and Putin might also be focused to get those resources, but Ukraine may share those as the deal for protection. At least that is what I understand from the words of Zelensky. Well, maybe he said like that to present some sort of the deal for the possible Trump's administration, because Trump always think about business. If he would see that he might invest in Ukraine security and get some of the profit, he might defend Ukraine after all, but it's just an assumption, nothing more. And also we don't know who wins the election, so we'll see. As one more deal is probably the point number 5 of this victory initiative or victory plan of Zelensky is to replace the NATO forces in Europe by Ukrainian soldiers, so the United States of America would not have to waste their resources and funds to maintain their military bases in Europe, because Ukraine will have enough experience to defend Europe against the possible future threat from Russia or China. Well, basically that's it. Nothing really new was shared. There are also some of the secret points in the plan, but those are relative only to the weaponry. Well, everything is good in this plan, except it doesn't fit the reality. Let's be honest, NATO membership is quite foggy. Ukraine obtains less weaponry, no permission for Ukraine to use the long-range weaponry, and we can see that politically West is getting tired. We see the rhetorics of Republican Party in the United States, how they want to quit financing Ukraine. The same story in some of the European countries. Ukraine inside also has some of the issues with the army reforms. By the way, Zelensky didn't say anything about that on this meeting. The mobilization in Ukrainian army is a big issue, and there's lots of the corruption around it. So it's not just about our allies, the partners from the West, it's also about internal Ukrainian issues. And honestly guys, the current Ukrainian defense depends on ordinary soldiers and also volunteers. That is how only Ukraine is capable to hold. Yeah, I understand that I sound kind of the pessimistic. We also have some of the good news. I'll tell you more about those in this video. But for now I want to tell you the biggest problem that Ukraine currently has. There are basically two way outs: to negotiate with Russia or to continue the war. Well, let's say that Ukraine negotiates with Russia right now. Russia demands Kherson Oblast, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, and in the future I think they will also need the Kharkiv Oblast. So Putin will say, and actually he says, give us those lands and we're gonna seize the fire. Well, first of all, Ukraine will never do it because it is a political suicide for every government. But even if Ukraine gives those territories for Russia and hope for the peace and for Russia to keep its word, which is kind of strange, there is no real security guarantees against the second Russian intervention as it happened in February of 2022. And based on the rhetorics which we heard from the Russian side, they don't need Ukraine as a state, as a country. They will attack it 100%. The only protection, as I told you, is NATO, but our allies will not take Ukraine in NATO in the coming probably years. That's why the other option is left to fight on the front lines. There Ukraine uses lots of the resources, and without the proper military support, Ukraine would need to replace the vehicles and weapons with the lives of the soldiers. For the Ukrainian population and society, it is critical because Ukraine may lose the future generations in this war. Yes, Russia has more losses, but they have many more people in their country, and Putin doesn't care. He may announce a new mobilization, and in any case they will have bigger army no matter how many people Ukraine may mobilize. So the picture that we currently see on the front lines will continue be like that in the coming probably also even years. Russia will take more ground little by little, occupying Donetsk Oblast, and after it Zaporizhia, after it maybe they'll perform the landing operation in Kherson, we'll see. Ukraine doesn't have enough weapons to withstand those Russian attacks, that's it. And if Donald Trump gets the power in the United States of America, there is a tiny little chance for Ukraine to continue to receive the weapons from the United States. For now, I see that our partners from the West are pushing Ukraine for negotiations with Russia without security guarantees for Ukraine. But Zelensky is leaning towards the second variant to continue this war with unknown outcome for Ukraine. Again, guys, I'm not blaming our allies. Still, Ukraine has the military support. Yes, it could be better, but Ukraine itself also has some of the internal issues. The Ukrainian government did many mistakes which led to the current situation, so our allies first of all warned Ukraine that the war is imminent, it is coming. And from what we saw, Ukraine didn't block the way out from Crimea. Moreover, someone demined those areas, so Russians marched, taking all of those territories in a matter of 4 days. Just Azov regiment, as I told you many times, defended Mariupol for many months. After all, I think only with the help of Zelensky, Ukraine managed to repel the Russian forces from many of the parts, including the Kiev region, including the Kharkiv operation, Kherson operation. But again, the last year it was a big mistake by Ukrainian military command and the Ukrainian government to start the counteroffensive in entire southern area and also in the Bakhmut direction simultaneously. Our allies insisted for Ukraine to concentrate the forces in just one particular direction to break through the Russian defense, but instead Ukraine spread the forces, which led to significant losses, and the main Russian defense lines were not penetrated. And after it, as we see, Russia took initiative on the front lines. Yes, there is also a successful operation from the tactical perspective in the Kursk region. Ukraine in a matter of days was able to gain lots of the territories under control, but in the future we'll see if this operation was really useful for Ukraine. So is there the light at the end of the tunnel for this war to be finished soon? I would say maybe, but I don't see it. Well, after all, the presentation of this peace plan is a good thing because our allies will have to comment on that, because the media in their countries will put attention on what is happening in Ukraine and particular steps which could help Ukraine to achieve a true peace. Meanwhile, such politicians as Chancellor Scholz are looking for the possible variants to moderate the talks between Russia and Ukraine, so Scholz will call Putin to speak about Ukraine. Honestly, I think that those are just the useless talks. Russia understands the language of power, so Ukraine should be provided by power. Nothing more will stop Russia. Meanwhile, Donald Trump also says that he's in good relations with Putin and other dictators.
A very good relationship with President Xi, and a very good relationship with Putin, and a very good relationship with Kim Jong-un, who has a nuclear force that you won't even believe. And by the way, today it was announced for those that he just blew up the railroad going into South Korea. That means South Korea is now cut off from Russia and China and various other places. Cut off by rail.
Mr. Trump, you just mentioned...
No, but these are big things. I have to mention that.
Yeah, you just mentioned...
South Korea is cut off from Russia and China, but those roads were never been in use. The roads are connecting South Korea and North Korea, the countries without any sort of the communication between each other.
Putin, though, and this has been this controversy of the past week. Can you say yes or no whether you have talked to Vladimir Putin since you stopped being president?
Well, I don't comment on that, but I will tell you that if I did, it's a smart thing. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, in terms of a country. He's got 2,000 nuclear weapons, and so do we. China has a lot less, but they'll catch us within 5 years.
That sounds very much like you did talk to him.
I don't talk about that.
You talk about talking to Netanyahu, you talk about talking to these people.
So here is to say whether he talked with Putin or not after stopping being a United States president. Kind of interesting. A guy who admired dictators like Putin and Kim Jong-un will never be a good president. Right, the good thing that the Ramstein meeting will start the next month and Biden will still be a president by the time. Also today there will be some sort of the meeting between NATO and Ukraine, but it will not be a decisive one, I guess. Well guys, I just hope that I'm wrong with my forecast that in the coming days or months Ukraine will get the invitation into NATO, Ukraine will have all the necessary military support, the permission to use long-range weapons on the Russian territory, and our allies will shut down all of the Russian missiles and drones over Ukraine. But I see that we were speaking about those points for more than 2 years and those are not happening. And NATO Secretary Rutte also said that there are some of the points of this victory plan that should be discussed with Ukraine because they are quite uncertain. However, my friends, let's stay positive. I'm sure that Ukraine will stay Ukraine and Russian army finally will not reach its goals in Ukraine and Russia itself will collapse after the internal conflicts within the country as it happened with the Soviet Union. This process is absolutely unstoppable. While we have more positive news, finally Ukraine this year obtains capable tanks, Abrams M1A1 tanks from Australia. Our friends from Australia are sending 49 of those tanks to Ukraine. Awesome number, even more than United States supplied to Ukraine before. The good thing that those tanks do not require heavy maintenance before being supplied to Ukraine, so they will arrive very soon, I hope. Australia handled those tanks quite well. So those tanks will not only compensate the Ukrainian losses in Abrams tanks, but also increase the group of the tanks in Ukraine. But I must say to you that Ukraine absolutely needs more of those units, like hundreds of the tanks, to successfully repel the Russian attacks and also for the offensive operations. The United States of America has lots of that stuff in their storages, but miraculously even Australia gives Ukraine more of those tanks. And here's the answer for you why Ukraine is still capable to defend itself: because of the volunteers, because of the community that supports the Ukrainian army. For example, Jake Bro, who collected lots of the funds to buy and repair the tracks for the Ukrainian army. But all of that is done by volunteers, by ordinary people. Most of the FPV drones, Mavics, all of that is bought by the ordinary people as well. So sometimes I go just frustrated that big countries cannot supply, for example, those trucks to Ukraine, because for their budgets it's basically nothing. And maybe they have some of the better vehicles stored somewhere in the desert, but those remain out there without any use. And later on those could be even scrapped, because after all they are worn by the weather, sun and everything. So the maintenance of the old vehicle could cost more than producing a new one, so Ukraine should obtain, I think, that kind of the stuff right now. The same goes for F-16s, thousands of those were produced, so Ukraine could potentially obtain many of the airplanes, but we have what we have. The F-16s Ukraine obtains are from Europe, and just limited quantity of those airplanes are available in Europe. Those deals were only possible because countries upgrade their airplanes in their air force from F-16s to F-35s. And to fight against the prevailing Russian air force, Ukraine needs many of those airplanes, many more than it was agreed already. But again, those airplanes are just stored in the desert. You may say that then as the United States need those airplanes in case the war, for example, with China or Russia itself, but there are thousands of those airplanes, literally thousands. You don't really need such a big number of those. And I don't think that F-16s will be massively in use against the possible war with China or Russia. After all, it's kind of the outdated airplane, and the United States Air Force have much better airplanes in their fleet. So the thing is that without those volunteers, the Ukrainian army wouldn't be able to hold, and also without the military support from the Western countries, the Ukrainian army would have to leave vast territories for Russia. And that's why the elections result in the United States are also critical for the future of Ukraine. For us, it's important to show the dictators their place, because, for example, the countries as North Korea are now trying to escalate. They see that the Western countries become bored about the wars, for example, in Ukraine. That's why from today North Korea calls South Korea a hostile state, indicating constitution change. Before they blown up some of the roads, and yesterday the news appeared that there are many volunteers who would like to sign the contracts in Korean army, in North Korean army. Well, I don't think that North Korea will openly strike the South one, but they'll try to escalate for sure. And if they do not see the prompt reaction from the Western allies, from South Korea itself, they may escalate even more and more until the critical point is reached. Guys, we also have the good news from the United States. They announced the new military package to be delivered to Ukraine. It is the part of the military bill which was voted earlier this year. Here we also have Humvees, but they do not live for a long time on the front lines. That's why Ukraine needs absolutely everything and as fast as possible. My friends, I'm going to keep you updated on the situation in Ukraine. Now, please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so, you help me a lot. And as usual, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.